thing that designing in 3D obviously has in common with designing in paper is when you make a physical model in paper, it kind of achieves the same purpose as making a physical model in the computer. You're doing it to create your design, but also to communicate your design. So it's kind of same in that respect. The main advantages are obviously some that are common to working in computer in any format. So like you can explore a lot of different ideas at once. You can kind of model or draw one thing and then make that invisible, and then model or draw something else and compare them. It's very easy to make changes. You can accurately view your model from a lot of different locations. So instead of kind of just getting your eye down on your paper model in different places, you can put cameras exactly in specific audience seats, or you can get section views really easily. You can also incorporate hand-drawn artwork very easily. So like that backdrop up there that's not hand-drawn, but it's something that was created outside of VectorWorks. Maybe from photos working in Photoshop. You could have a hand-drawn element that you scan and then bring it into VectorWorks. Obviously, it allows for this next step, which is the rendering. You can render with light and with texture in the computer, and also you can export from VectorWorks to have it be the basis of hand-drawn work. So like you could model some walls for your set and then look at it in perspective and then export that and then sketch on it. So it kind of gives you the basis of something that you would draw on by hand without having to figure all the perspective out, without doing that. Obviously, you can also produce drawings very easily from it. And you can obviously share and transport your model very easily on a thumb drive or over the internet instead of transporting an actual physical model. If you look at your sheet, there's some prerequisites on here. I'm not even going to really get into these because you're going to get something out of this whether you have done VectorWorks or not. You don't necessarily have to have done these things, but just for your reference, this is what would help if you had some familiarity with these things already that are written down here. So let's jump right to tips for working in 3D. So the first one here, obviously keeping your objects organized using layers and classes. This is something that comes in very handy when you're working in 3D because you can very easily disable parts of your model that you don't want to see. So if I decide that I don't want to see any of my masking, I don't want to see the theater structure, I can easily turn things on and off that I don't want to see. And that's a little more critical working in 3D than in 2D because you get objects that are just all on top of each other, one in front of, something's in front of something else like this. So it's very important to be able to turn off things you don't want to see. Saving views and using your layer and class visibilities. So if you don't already know, VectorWorks has the ability to save views, and if you take advantage of this, it'll allow you to very quickly transition between different views and render modes, and basically very quickly turn different layers and classes on, so that you can get back to different views that you're trying to work with. So like I have one here for focus call, which brings me into a state where I'm working on my lighting plot. I have one for working on my set design. So you can save all kinds of different views that'll help you work more quickly. When you're working in 3D, you want to be in a unified view, which means all your layers are going to change view together. If you're not unified, then you'll only change view on the active layer, which doesn't really help you very much. You only have one part of your model changing view. Using plan rotation, this is something that I haven't even really used much, and I kind of completely forgot that you can even do it. But if you create objects and you end up sort of rotating them into, not being perpendicular to the XY plane anymore, you can actually just rotate your entire drawing plan and then work at that angle to do whatever you need to do, and then put it back to, and actually if I just select top plane again, it should go back to straight. And I can also set that by dragging along something that's angled, and it'll flatten that out for me, and then I can work in a flat mode like that. So that's plan rotation. Using select similar is another really, really awesome tool that I just recently discovered, and I already am like, I don't understand how I survived without the select similar tool. So this little thing that looks like a magic wand here is select similar.
The fairy wand.
Yeah. Have you used it?
I have.
It allows you to select objects based on things that they have in common with each other. Like right now it's set to object type. So if I select something, it's going to immediately select all the objects of that type. So I just got all the walls in my drawing here that are visible with one click. So that's a really handy tool, especially if you have a drawing or a model that you didn't pay any attention to the organization when you were creating it, the layers and classes. If you didn't really pay any attention to it and you need to go back in and organize it now, using that select similar tool to select similar things so you can then apply them to classes and layers that you want and kind of organize your drawing. That's a fast way to select like objects.
Matt, how did you get that management dialog box up with the select similar tool?
So that's right here in the top
Oh,
of the
I see.
screen.
Okay.
It's one of the options for this tool.
Excellent.
Yeah.
That's good to know. I didn't know that existed.
Yep. Yeah, so it's not just object type. You can change it to all kinds of different parameters.
Okay.
You can get pretty fancy with what you want to select. It's almost like find and modify, right?
Right.
It's like I want to find and select every object that meets these conditions. And then the last thing here is a bunch of useful shortcuts if you're not aware of them already. So if you're not aware that your number keypad on your keyboard will cycle you through the standard 3D views, left isometric, front, right isometric. That's just going around my keypad, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 6, 9, 8, 7, 4, 1, going around. And then 0 takes me back to top plan. Control 0 will call up the set 3D view tool where I can say I want to sit here and I want to look that way and I want to be 5 feet off the ground and I want to look at a point 5 feet off the ground, and it'll give me that view. And then I can use my standard visualization tools to then walk around the model. I can use walkthrough, fly over, translate view. If I can walk to a different point, I can look around. I can translate my view. So, and I got to that with the set 3D view to start that. You could also use a camera object. If you placed a camera object, you could always go back to the exact same camera that way. Render shortcuts, Control-Shift-W gets you to wireframe. Control-Shift-G gets you to OpenGL. OpenGL is probably the best mode for kind of still being able to deal with your model and have it rendered. Like, it's not going to take a long time to reprocess when you're moving things around in OpenGL. Control-Shift-W back to wireframe. Control-Shift-F will give you final quality RenderWorks when you want to really let it, process things realistically. Control-Shift comma and Control-Shift period will cycle through your views, kind of forward and backward. It's basically next and previous. So it's kind of a way of undoing your view changes only. So if I'm changing my view, if I change my view, I'm like, oh, I want to go back to the view I had 2 changes ago. I can just Control-Shift comma, and it'll go backwards. B is X-ray mode. So if I hold B down, it'll momentarily get rid of all the render and the color fill, which is really handy even in 2D environment. If you have a lot of 2D objects that all have image or color fill on them, just hold B and all the fill will just disappear momentarily, and you can select something that's blocked by the fill of an object. Holding J will grab your select coincident. So if I'm in a case where I'm trying to select something and there's just so many objects here, I can't get the thing I want. If I hold J and click, I get select coincident. Now I can choose, well, which things did you want to select in the vicinity of the cursor? And then I can select that object. obviously, you probably know the typical Control-C for copy, Control-V for paste. VectorWorks has Control-Shift-V is paste in place. That'll place an object exactly where you copied it from, on top of its original, which is handy if you want to then move it an exact amount of distance. So I can say Control-C, Control-Shift-V, paste in place, and then Control-M, move, and I can move it exactly the distance I want. Instead of just hitting paste, and then it just kind of appears at some random distance, right? And then one other thing is the marquee tool. So if you drag a window around something, anything contained inside will be selected. If you hold Alt when you do that, anything you touch will be selected. So that's another way of kind of grabbing objects that you can't, for some reason, entirely contain without getting other things you don't want. You could just touch them by holding Alt. So that's that. All right, let's jump into the interesting stuff. Okay. So the first thing I want to talk about, has anybody used the Reshape tool on walls for 3D reshaping walls? No?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
Nick has?
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to look at I'm going to select my layer or my class for the perimeter fence, for the base of the perimeter fence, and we're going to look at only that. I'm going to zoom in. So this is the base of the perimeter fence. It's just made using the standard wall tool. If I want to create like this crazy cutaway, like the T-Rex broke through the concrete or whatever, I could use my Reshape tool, which is over here, to add vertices to the wall and to move those vertices. So like if I wanted to make a wall that is sloped at the top instead of just rectangular top, I can change the vertices of the wall and now get a sloped wall. And if I am careful with my data bar entry there, I can be very precise about that, like what angle I want or how high I want it to be. If I want to add a vertice, then I just hit the little plus here, and I go to an existing one, and then click and drag away, and it'll add a vertice. So you can very quickly create kind of interesting shapes, from your walls. And that's how I did this. I just kept adding vertices and just playing around with it until I got the T-Rex having broken through the wall. So that's the 3D Reshape tool. Okay, the next thing we're going to look at is custom textures. So who's done some rendering? Has anybody done some rendering with textures? Have you made custom textures?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we're going to look at. So this is the floor, the ground of my set. It's just two extrudes, one to make kind of a road area and then one to be just sort of the painted surface of the floor. So right now we're looking at an OpenGL rendering, looking at just with the fill color. There's no textures or anything applied. So what if I want that to look more realistic? I want it to look like dirt. I want it to look like a stone gravel road. Then what I can do is actually create a custom texture and apply it to those objects. So I don't have my resource browser open right now, so I'm going to open my resource browser. And what I would do is I would say I want a new resource and I want to create a RenderWorks texture. So this is the box for creating a new texture. There are 4 shaders that contribute to a texture. Color, what I'm going to do under color is say I want the color of this texture to come from an image, and then I'm going to I can import an image file. For right now I'm just going to actually, why don't we go ahead and import. So my resources here, I downloaded. If you just search on Google for like textures, like dirt texture, seamless dirt texture, or whatever you're looking for, you'll find images that are designed to be tiled, to be repeated over and over and over again, mapped onto an object and look nice and smooth. So this is one of the ones I downloaded, so I'm just going to click on that. One thing that's interesting, when you choose your image, you can, if you want to, also filter it by a color. So if like the color of the thing you downloaded is not quite right, rather than taking it into Photoshop and processing it, you could just kind of overlay it with a color. If the color isn't quite right, you can sort of filter it and change the color tone of it a little bit if you want to. So I got that. Now I'm gonna leave all this other stuff none. So the reflectivity obviously gives you different options for the way light reflects off of it. If I make it metallic or glass, that would make it very reflective. Transparency we'll get to in a minute. Bump is for actually sort of applying like surface texture to it to make it actually look like it has a 3D surface texture. So we've chosen the image for the texture. The next thing we want to do is choose the size that image is. So I'm going to hit set by image here, and I'm going to drag a little across the image, and now I tell it how big is that in real life. How, what's the size of that? So I'm just going to say 10 feet. And over here in the preview, if I make the preview size also 10 feet, oops, yeah, of course it's going to do that. Then it should show me. That's interesting. Let me take a look at the actual texture I already created. So here's the one I already created. Okay, so here I did 10 and here I looked at it at 50 feet. So you can see I set the image to 10 feet and I made the preview image 50 feet across. So that gives me an idea, because I'm going to map that onto an extrude that's 50 feet across already. So that kind of gives me an idea what it's going to actually look like. And then I can hit OK. So now what I need to do is I need to apply that texture to this extrude. So under the object info, I can say I want my JP dirt. And in OpenGL, because I have it set to show me textures in OpenGL, it'll apply the texture. And I can do the same thing with a texture I have made for the road surface, which is that other image, another image of kind of gravelly road. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's kind of quickly creating a custom texture, setting the image size, and applying it to an object. And then you're going to want to then visualize the texture and see what it actually looks like under some different render modes. So if you go to View, Set Lighting Options, you can make some adjustments here for your rendering purposes. You want to turn indirect lighting off. That's going to make your rendering go a lot faster. And here you can set parameters for the ambient light. You can adjust the brightness. You can even change the color if you want to. Because I'm all interior here, I don't really need an environment background. And right now I'm not using any specific lighting objects, so I don't really have to worry about emitters. I'm pretty much just making sure that there's some ambient light turned on so that if I go to a higher render mode, it's actually, since this is only, let's go to final quality. I can see what it looks like under that amount of ambient light. And so see how that's changing in the back there? If I change the amount of ambient light. So I can kind of tweak my global ambient light that way. Okay, so that is creating and applying a texture. And if you go around and do that to all the different objects, in your model, then you're going to start getting close to a much more realistic, depiction of things. So some of you may have already kind of caught on that if we wanted to take an image offline from, say, a backdrop manufacturer, and we want to get that image into VectorWorks in 3D, we want we want to see the backdrop we're going to rent, we want to see that in our model, that I could create a texture just like I just did, right? I create a new texture, I choose the image of the backdrop that we're renting, and then I could do like this, I could create a giant extrude and apply it. I could also apply it to like a wall. I could make a wall that's 20 by 50, that's really skinny. I could use the curtain object maybe. There's different ways I could do that. But as I recently discovered, VectorWorks actually has the ability to do that all for you very, very quickly, which is something that I was not even aware of. And it's using the tool called image prop. So under model, there's this thing called image prop. And what it does is it very, very quickly takes an image and gets it onto a 3D object. It creates the texture automatically for you. It puts the image into the texture like we just did. It creates an object and it applies it to it. It does all of that automatically. So I'm going to go ahead and create an image prop, and it says choose an image. I'm going to choose the logo here. And then it gives me some options. So I can tell it how big is this object going to be that logo is being applied to. I'll just keep what it says there, 6 by 8, so that's not a bad size for maybe some sign we're going to fly in or something. I can lock or unlock the aspect ratio if I want to. Right now we're going to not have any kind of mask. And we're going to, down here, we're not going to create a plugin object. The reason why this is called image prop is because it's sort of intended for, you could say like architectural landscape design. If I create a plugin object and I select auto rotate to viewer, then I guess here I'll just do it so you can see what happens. It'll keep that image, even though it's, see the frame of it, the 3D where it's located, but it'll always point toward me. Which is kind of nice if you're sort of wanting to do like a fake 3D thing, like maybe you want to put in little images of people or plants or trees or something, and no matter how you change the view, it'll always keep them pointed at you. So it's sort of like a fake 3D object. Like, I don't have a 3D tree, I have a flat tree that just always points toward me. Which is okay maybe for some things, but for us, we don't want it to do that. We want it to always be pointing in the direction it's supposed to be. So I could just turn auto rotate off, and it would now it will stay facing the right direction all the time. Now this does make it an image prop object, which is unnecessary if I don't need these features. Like I can also do this cross planes thing where it'll fake like it's a 3D object. It'll repeat the image. We really don't need to do this though if we're not going to use it that way. What we can do is just say, I don't want to create a plugin object. Oh, it's already in use because I just created that, so I'll do 2 here. And now you can see it's just a 3D polygon. And if I go to render, you can see right here, this is the texture that it automatically created. Okay? And I can quickly edit that texture by clicking right here and go edit texture resource. Now, did everybody notice that button that said constant reflectivity? Mm-hmm. Okay, so because I checked constant reflectivity, it added this to the texture, this glow. And if I edit that, you'll see it says 100% is the brightness of the glow. It's not actually emitting light, but what that is doing is basically that object is going to have constant reflectivity. It's not going to, if I shine a light at it, I'm not going to see any difference. It's almost like it has a self-illumination to it, kind of like if you're creating a neon sign or something. So it's a way of sort of pretending like this object is lit, but you're not using any lighting objects. It's a way to kind of keep it visible all the time. And if you look at, I didn't get to this part when I first created this rendering. See the way this backdrop is so illuminated? Like it's very clear, right? that's because it has that glow, that constant reflectivity turned on. If I were to turn that off of this object, and because all my lights are out here pointing in this way, what would you expect to see if there were lights pointing like this?
Black.
You'd expect to see shadows of all this fencing and wiring on the backdrop, right? And there'd be areas of the backdrop that aren't illuminated well at all, right? They'd be getting dark and trailing off. Same thing with the borders and the legs. Like, you could really make out the definition of that. And my stage lights are really only pointing kind of in here. So they would not be illuminating the legs and the borders very, this perfectly uniformly, like just perfectly visible all the way around. That's because constant reflectivity was on in those textures. Now, if you're just creating renderings like to share your ideas kind of thing like this, like maybe that's fine, maybe it doesn't, it's not an issue at all for you. You could do that. But if you're gonna try to create photorealistic renderings, you probably want to turn that off, or at least turn it down, like turn the glow way down. So just a tip there. Okay, so everybody following that so far? We're good on that? Any questions on the image prop?
Is constant reflectivity a default on?
It may, I don't know if it shows up as checked every time you go into the tool.
Okay.
It may, and you just have to uncheck it. You just have to uncheck it from the option there.
Sure, okay.
Okay, so now we're gonna look at how to create cut surface, cut objects. So the way those borders have all the cut to them of the vines and everything, you can see through that, right? How do we get to that the way this image is, the way I can see through those holes and everything? How do we do that? And the way you do that is with what's called a mask. So what I'm going to do here, what I did was I downloaded resources. So I downloaded an image of a leg from a backdrop manufacturer, and then I took it into Photoshop and I created a masked version of it, like this. Right, so I got rid of like kind of the white stuff and I just made it all black, select inverse, made it all white. So I have this nice image that tells me where is the material I want to see through, or the material I don't want to see through, and where is the material I do want to see through, right? So what I'm going to do here is go to image prop. I selected the original image of the leg, and this time I want to use a mask. Okay, so when I first started the image prop, I selected this. That's the image I selected for the image prop. But I'm going to say I want to use a mask this time, so I'm going to create mask, and I want to import an image file for the mask. Now, I could select this image, and it has sort of a way of like, you can sort of select that white area and give it a tolerance, and it'll try to map to that space, but it's not as reliable as actually using this, having that very defined. This is where we want to see, this is where we don't want to see. So I'm going to choose this version. And I'm going to choose the source of mask is going to be transparent color. And I'll say OK. And now what I am telling it, if I click transparent color, so I can click right here. This is the part that I want to be transparent, the black area in this image. This image could be any combination of colors. It could be blue and yellow. It could be green and red, whatever. As long as there's a defined two colors where you want to see, where you don't want to see. So I select that one. That's the area I don't want to see. And I hit OK. We're not going to create a plugin object, and I'm not going to do the constant reflectivity, because if we are going to do realistic lighting, I want it to be realistic. I don't want the constant reflectivity. So I'm going to hit OK. And now you'll see we have a leg.
that we can see through. Now, see that little line that's popping up there? See what I'm talking about around the edge? It's showing the edge. Why is it showing the edge? We just told it, I don't want to see this part. Why is it showing me this little edge? And I was running into a lot of issue with this, like what is going on here? Even if I go to Final Quality RenderWorks, see, it's still there.
It's kind of disappearing.
It's kind of, you can, it really is still there though.
Yeah.
It depends on your lighting and it depends on where you are. So, like, why is it doing this? I mean, you can still see a line there. If I was on a lighter background, you'd still be able to see it. See? It's hard, I can see it better on my screen, but there's a faint line there.
Let's see.
As far as I can tell, this might actually be sort of an intention glitch in VectorWorks. I don't think they intended for this to happen. And the only way I found to fix it is instead of using this as my mask, I used this. I had to actually surround the area that I wanted to keep.
So you put a black border on
So
it.
I just put a little 1 pixel, 2 pixel all the way around. Because for whatever reason, without the area I don't want to see actually going all the way around the area I do want to see, I was getting that little line.
And was that just from the
That was just-
edge of the picture that you?
Yeah, it's like still showing me the edge of the object
Right.
for some reason. Even though I said this should be transparent, it's like, oh, you mean this, but leave the little, like,
leave
for
our
some
border.
reason.
Yeah.
So for whatever reason, I don't know if it's just kind of a glitch in the program, you do have to surround the area you want to keep if you don't want that little rendering error to appear.
So you're masking the masking.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. If you take a look at this logo, I didn't have that problem because the mask I used for that did surround it.
Huh.
Right? That was black all the way around the logo.
Uh-huh.
I got rid of all that and I didn't have that defect. So that's what kind of clued me into that's what you need to do with your mask. So you do, for right now anyway, need that mask to be completely contained. Okay. All right, so any questions about that? You kind of understand the basics of that, and you can achieve this effect very, very quickly with, like I'm gonna do an image prop here of like this. So I just got 2 colors. I say use mask, and then import. I'm gonna use this image as the mask, transparent color. I want to see through where the holes are. Okay, not doing reflectivity, it's not going to be a plugin. And that fast you have an object you can see through. Without even really creating a 3D object, right? Like you didn't have to do any. It created the 3D object for you. It created the texture for you. It applied the texture for you. So save lots of time using that tool. Yep.
Oh no, obviously I wasn't here for part of it.
Uh-huh.
But like I saw that with the the part of the forestry, like you have a picture and then you have the like outline of it with the
mask image?
the mask image. How
Yes.
do you like generate those
I did that in Photoshop.
in Photoshop?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you know, you're probably gonna have to do that. I mean, you have to do that to create masks, but like this was the image I originally pulled to the border. It's got all this text in there because it's, you know, they probably don't want you reproducing this. So I had to Photoshop that out and then, you know, which is not too difficult. Use your magic selection tool to get all that white area and then you can paint it smooth white and then hit select inverse and then paint the other area smooth black. So like, you know, it's not too difficult a thing to accomplish in Photoshop.
So when you like trying to kind of phrase this. So when you go back into VectorWorks and then you want to upload that mask.
Yep.
How does it know? How does it know to go to the tree?
Yep.
Is that like a weird phrasing of it? But that's what I'm like not catching.
So when I created the object, like if I go to one of these legs I already have created and I look at the texture it created for that,
you can see that under transparency, it has an image mask. So I could go back into any image that I've put, if I didn't put transparency on something, if I just created an image prop without the transparency, I could always go back to it later and edit the texture, and I could say, use an image mask, and I could always add the mask in later. So you can add a mask to any, they don't have to be two objects that coincide even necessarily. Like, I mean, I could apply this, this to some other image. I could apply this Swiss cheese to some other image, and if I want to just punch holes in something, right? Which actually gets us on to the next thing, which is how to create, using the same kind of things we're talking about, how to create a scrim effect. Now, I was playing around with this for a while. Like, how do you create a realistic kind of looking scrim effect? Because what's a scrim? It's basically an image like this. It's an object that has little holes of transparency. They're just really small, right? So it's basically the same thing we just did, but the holes, like that, unlike that Swiss cheese image, are super, super tiny. So what I tried to do initially was use this as an image mask and make it small, and it just wasn't working very well. So what I eventually arrived at was a slightly different technique. So let me go to, I have a scrim, a show scrim here, and it's gonna, as it renders, you sort of see the shark tooth effect, kind of see all the little holes in it. There's nothing behind it right now for you to look at, but if I click on this and I edit the texture, so what I did for the transparency to create a scrim was I used this bricks option, which is kind of basically a way of creating that black and white grid, but instead of using an image, I actually input these settings for bricks. And these, I wrote the settings down on here so you can play around with it if you want to try it. But basically I ended up with black and white, 40% contrast. My brick width is a 1/2 inch, the height is 1 inch. The gaps between are 1/2 inch, still black and white, and this is what the noise is set to. And by doing that, using that for the transparency instead of an image, I was able to get something that looks like this. Again, I still have the glow on the backdrop, so the backdrop is glowing because it has that constant reflectivity going. Otherwise, I'd probably not really see it at all. But it's a pretty good representation of a scrim, I think. I mean, you can even see the T-Rex through the T-Rex, right? You can see that the objects behind the logo itself is also has that going on. And this scrim object, the scrim texture, can also have reflectivity to it as well. So I have it turned off right now because I don't want that logo really bright. I want it to respond to the light accurately. So the glow is not turned on here, which is good. Any other questions about image prop and applying textures? And so creating a custom texture, using the image prop tool for it to do that for you automatically, and then using the mask transparency to use an image to cut away part of it, to make it transparent for part of it, or using the bricks option under transparency for doing that scrim, that realistic scrim kind of effect. Okay. Let's talk real quick about, has anyone done anything with custom working planes at all? Okay. So, whenever you go into top plan view, the working plane, the active working plane, is being aligned with your active layer plane. So if I I'm in top plan now. If I go to the side view here, I can actually use my selection tool to click on the axes, and I'll get all these colored dots. And that's allowing me to move the active working plane. And you can see right now, it's centered. It's centered on the active layer plane. But if I want to move the working plane, I can click and I can drag it straight up. You can see this pink area is the active working plane. I can even rotate it if I want to. I can rotate it in other directions. So that's one way of. So what I'm doing when I do that is I'm saying I need to draw something on some weird angle that's not just looking straight down or just looking straight from the side. I need a surface that is at some odd angle, and I want to be able to draw on that surface and extrude from that surface. So by setting a custom working plane, that gives me a surface that I can work on. And if I were to, start drawing now, I would be drawing on this surface, on this plane that I just created. Get this back to. Okay. Now if I go back to top plan, it'll realign the planes for me, so I'm back to the working plane being aligned with the layer plane. The working plane tool is actually under 3D modeling, set working plane. The other way you can set a working plane is with this planar face mode, and you can just use existing surfaces to set your working plane. So if there's already a surface of an object that's at a weird angle, you can just choose that angle. Like this wall right here is at an odd angle from the coordinate system. Or I could do what's called this 3-point mode, where I choose 3 points and it'll create a plane that goes between those 3 points. One other thing that's handy, if I go to palettes, there's actually a working planes palette, and I can save working planes. So if I create a working plane that I want to be able to draw on, I can open up this palette and I can go new, and it'll save the plane that I currently have there. And then I can easily get back to that plane just by double clicking on it in the palette, which is handy because anytime you go back to top plan, it's going to realign. So if you want to keep switching back to that plane, then you should probably save it so you can. Or I'm not sure if just returning the view actually changes the plane. So you definitely want to save your plane. It's a safer way of doing it. So I'll show you a practical example of this. We're going to look at under my save views here. So we've got this guard tower that nobody is working at for some reason, which is probably a good idea since T-Rex just broke through the fence and you probably don't want to be here right now. So you'll notice the way this tower is designed, that the footprint is bigger than the base of the tower, right? So it starts wide and then it gets narrower. So the legs of this tower have to taper in, right? How can we extrude something like that? That has to follow this diagonal path from down out here to in up here. Like how can we do that? So, well, this is a situation where a custom working plane is very handy. So here I've got the upper part of the tower that I already made using my extrude, wall, window, basic functions, and I've created the footing down here for what I want the leg to sit on. So I could go ahead and create a working plane right on this base footing if I want to. So I want to put a profile here of the leg. So I just use my facial selection set working plane mode to select the top of this footing, and I'm gonna draw from the center. I wanna draw. Does everybody know how to use the data bar like this to enter data?
Mhm.
It's a very, very handy. Of course, I didn't get the size right. I can go back in and say, rescale from the middle. I want this to be 5 by 5. That's another handy tool if you don't know it. I want to change the size on something, but I want the middle to stay in the same place. Alright, so I've got the footprint there for my leg that I need to get from down here to up at the base of the tower. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to do an extrude along path, but I need a path that goes between those 2 points. So the safest way to make sure I can draw a line directly between that point and the point down here is to set a working plane. So I'm going to use my 3-point mode. I'm going to choose the point that is on the outside corner of the tower, and I'm going to come down and I'm going to choose the point that's on the outside corner of the leg. And then I need a third point that is exactly 45, because I want this plane to appear along the 45, because that is heading directly in toward the corner above. Okay. So I have a plane set there. A very handy mode or tool is up here. It says look at working plane. It flattens that out for me, so I'm looking directly at the working plane. It can get really confusing. Things can spin on you. Especially if you have other objects on behind that, it can be really, so it's helpful to turn off objects that you don't want impeding your view, like have only what you're trying to work with. Now the problem with this is I can't quite see the corner that I need to see. Rotating the direction I want you to.
So when you're creating a working plane, essentially what you're doing is creating a drawing surface.
Yes. Okay. Yep. Mm-hmm. You're creating a surface that you can work on. Working. Okay, so I'm going to grab my line tool and come in here and get the outside corner of that square. And I'm going to come up here. I'm going to get the outside corner of the base up here. So I've drawn a line now on my working plane that goes from the outside corner at the base to the outside corner at the top. And you can see the plane of this line is 3D. So that line is very specific in 3D space where each end is. It's not on the screen plane. You're not gonna see it like always flat on your screen. It's very specifically in 3D space. And now what I can do is I can extrude along path. So I'm gonna select the square, I'm gonna select the path, and we go to model, extrude along path. Select the path object, that's the one that's highlighted. I want that line. I'm going to fix the profile. So I want to maintain the relative position and orientation of the profile with respect to the path. So I want this point to follow that line exactly. So I need to fix the profile so that it stays exactly with that line. And I hit OK, and now I have an extrusion that is tapering. It's tipping in both directions at the same time as it's
But staying the same,
staying
5
the
inches.
same cross section, but it's following that.
so the structure itself isn't tapering, it's just,
No, it's you have these weird these weird angles at the base and the end, right? So I could then take this, create a drawing, and dimension what those angles are, and then I would know exactly what I need to cut if I were going to make that piece in real life, right? Okay. I had another example I could show you, but I think in the interest of looking at something else more interesting in our last 20 minutes, I'll just tell you about it real quick, just so you're aware. process. I try to save often, but a lot of times I forget to, so that backup happening every once in a while is very, very helpful sometimes. Alright, let me show snap others. I want only my active layer. Go back to the plan. Okay. Oh, we got our first not responding. Took a while.
Well, you've been cranking it through. Surprise.
I mean, I haven't been rendering much, but VectorWorks recently has seemed like it goes not responding a lot. Even when I just go to close the program, it's like not responding is like a feature of closing the program for some reason. All right, so I'm gonna look at. Oh, another little tip. Does everybody know that if you name your classes with hyphens in them, so see the way this class is got this little hierarchy to it, Jurassic and then fence metal. The name of that class is actually Jurassic -fence metal with no spaces on either side of the hyphen, and that is a way of sort of, so each one of these classes is actually called Jurassic-backdrop, Jurassic-car, Jurassic-fence, Jurassic-floor. And because you do that, it automatically creates that hierarchical view to it. And if you go to assign an object to a class, it will go through that hierarchy as well. So if you're doing something with a lot of classes, something very 3D intensive like this, that's a handy way to get your classes to organize into that menu structure by using hyphen in the name. Which I don't think I mentioned that on my tips there. So I'm just gonna mention what the other thing I used the custom working plane for. Were these crazy curved wires where it's supposed to look like the T-Rex broke through them. So what I did was I took that 3-point working plane, the way of setting the working plane with 3 points, and I chose a point here, I chose a point down at the ground, and I chose a point over here. So I created a working plane that was at kind of an odd angle, and then I drew a curve on that plane, and then I did another one of those extrude along path. And that gave me a curve that was going through 3D space in kind of an odd way, right? And then I kind of just played around with the deform tool, this guy, which took a lot of playing around. Like, that tool is weird. Like, when I was doing it, like, you can get that to sort of like, that extrude will just like spiral like crazy if you want, like it's really, but to try to just sort of, you know, play around and get it to look very, you know, you can see the ones that kind of are very oddly shaped was because I was just messing with them with the deform tool, try to make them look a little crazy. So that's another way to use the custom working plane if you need to do something on an odd angle like that. And it may be faster to do it that way. You could always extrude something or do something on the ground plane, on the layer plane, do it flat, and then try to move it, and then elevate it, and then rotate it a little in this axis, and then turn to your right view, and then rotate it a little in that axis, and like you keep doing that. And that's kind of how I got this post to be laying on the ground right where I wanted it. You can do that, but sometimes it's just easier if you know right where you want it to be. Just draw a working plane right where you want it to be, and do the work directly there. Just a quick note about SketchUp. Has anybody imported anything from SketchUp? Does everybody know what Google SketchUp is? SketchUp is Google's like free CAD software and CAD library. People create stuff in SketchUp, and there's a library online for SketchUp. That's where I found the T-Rex. That's where I found the Jeep. The Jeep also. Why are you not showing me the Jeep right now? When all else fails, go back to a save view. There we go. So just a note about this. So I went to SketchUp, Google. I found a model for the T-Rex. I found a model for Jurassic Park Jeep. I've got one for the Explorer, the green and yellow, Ford Explorer from the movie. Also, people have models of this stuff already. I originally started looking at this in VectorWorks 2013, and when I went to import a SketchUp file, so I go File, Import, SketchUp, and I pick one of these. Let's do the Explorer. So these are our options. What do I want it to be? I would definitely want it to come in as meshes and 3D polygons. Architectural objects means it'll try to use like the wall tool and the stair tool, and that ain't gonna work too well for a car. That can be handy if you're importing something that is like a building or a model of a room from SketchUp or something. Then when you import it, you can go ahead and convert it right into VectorWorks walls and windows and stuff. We don't want to do that for a car. The nice thing, or the problem I ran into in VectorWorks 2013, there's no way to import an object from SketchUp in 2013 and maintain the materials, import transparency and image data as RenderWorks textures, create RenderWorks textures for all materials. So all the coloring that the person did in the model, the red and the correct colors for the car and everything, in 2016, you can just say import all that stuff and you'll get the correct colors and all that stuff. In 2013, I lost all that information. I would have had to go in and like select 3D polygons, like area by area, and change them to the right color, and it just would a nightmare. That would be horrible. So you can do it in 2016 automatically. I think I also did groups of 3D polygons. Oh yeah, because this is how you preserve the texture assignment and mapping. You have to do 3D polygons, not mesh object. Because I think mesh object will make the whole vehicle like one object, like a mesh, and it can't apply textures to individual parts of the mesh. So you need 3D polygons for that. Just to note, when you do import stuff from SketchUp, a lot of this stuff may have been made in SketchUp, or it may have started out in like AutoCAD or something, and sometimes you'll get a new layer called layer 0, and you may have to kind of reorganize things a little bit once it comes in. You may also have to tweak some things about it. Like when I brought the Jeep in, for some reason the logos on the doors didn't come in right. Like that particular texture wasn't applied properly. So I just used the one that I already made. I did my image prop, 3D polygon, and just stuck it on the door of the car, and problem solved. Okay. Questions about that? We're not doing too bad here. So, rendering with light. This is the fun part. So we have gone through and we've created something in 3D. We've created a model in 3D using all our standard tools, using our custom working planes. We've applied textures. We've changed, looked at it in 3D from different angles and stuff. But now we want to make it look a little more realistic. We want to play with actually lighting it. So that's what we're going to do. What I typically do is I have a separate layer for my light objects and my camera objects. I usually keep on the same layer, so I'm just going to turn that on. And I'm going to make sure I'm showing all my objects here. So if I want to add lights under visualization, there is the light tool. And I like to use it in the spotlight mode because that's just, in theater, we take individual lighting fixtures that are spotlights and point them at things. So, you can play with the other types of light sources as well, but I typically go with the spotlight mode. So, what I'm going to do here is select where the light goes, and then I have to point it whatever I want it to be pointing at. So I'm actually going to do this in, let me check and see what classes this is going to appear on here. I want this to be on the class called lights, so I don't accidentally lose track of where it is. And I'm gonna be on this layer. So I'm gonna put a light object down inside view. Second not responding.
Woo!
Get it together, VectorWorks. You can do it. I have faith in you. There we go. Side view. And just for the purpose of this, I'm just going to pick a spot. And when I select where it goes, I can now play with my settings for this light source. I can tell it whether I want it to be on or off. I can choose the color. I can tell it to cast shadows. So I'll see shadows, somewhat realistically. I typically use the use emitter because you can set sort of the brightness of the light source when the dimmer is at 100. So if I need to get more brightness out of that light source, I can go in and just increase its ability to go brighter. I can also set the color temperature. If you go to Spotlight Specs, you can set the beam spread for this light source. So that's all good. I'm just going to say, okay, it's on, it's at 100%. And now I get the option of where does this point? And I'm going to point it obviously down at the stage. Okay. So inside view now, I've got that at the right elevation, the right distance from the stage that I want, and I've pointed it down where I want. Now if I go to plan, you'll see that, well, it kind of ended up being, it doesn't point straight from where I put the light. So now I can play around with it in plan if I want. And I'm just going to go to gray my others so I can see this a little better. And I can now, if I want it to point straight, I can make it point more straight like that. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Now the other thing I want to do with this under data, I want to actually give this a name that makes some kind of sense. So I'm just gonna, for right now, I'm just gonna call this new, because as I learned under palettes, there's something called the visualization palette, which is kind of like a lighting console. And I can sort all the lighting objects in this drawing by the name, the class they're on, whatnot. But this gives me the ability to select and turn on or off multiple light sources at the same time, to edit multiple light sources at the same time. If I want to turn the shadows off, turn those lights off, change their color, make them brighter or dimmer, I can do that much more quickly in the visualization palette using the logical names that I gave the light objects, rather than going and constantly individually selecting light sources, right? Because some of them can be difficult to select, they're overlapping, they're on top of things, it's just kind of easier to go and grab them from the visualization palette. Okay? All right, so let's see what we look like in if we visualize with lighting. So looking at the sheet here, it says pick a 3D view and go to fast or custom RenderWorks with the quality set to low. I kind of like that if I go to custom RenderWorks, so my custom RenderWorks settings, I have shadows, I have textures, colors. I'm going to make the quality low. I can't see the bottom of the window. Okay, well, we're going to leave it at medium then. And I'm going to go to a front view here. Front. And I'm going to go to rendering, custom RenderWorks. Using the custom setting and controlling the quality there kind of lets you get somewhat realistic renderings without wasting the time of a final quality until you're ready to do that. You can see we're already starting to see some realistic stuff here. We've got you can see shadows from the light sources out front. Now I'm going to go up and adjust you can see it says adjust environment lighting. So I'm going to go up to my set lighting options and I'm going to adjust my environment lighting my ambient light is really high right now, which is kind of just washing out the effect of all those light objects that I put in. So let's just go ahead and turn it off. Woo. This emitter setting right here is kind of a master for all those individual light objects. So if I want to kind of bring the intensity down on all the emitters in the drawing at once, I can do that with the emitter brightness right here. I'm just going to leave that at 100, and I'm going to control the brightness of, try to put this somewhere where we can still see it. I'm going to try to control the brightness with my visualization palette. There we go, did a re-render. That looks a little better. Now let's say I want to change, stay here palette. I'm going to turn off that new fixture I created. That was washing things out a bit. So I've got some fixtures from above these 5 here. If I right click, edit those, I can change the color on them. Try it. It'll re-render with green downlight now. Let's take a look at our front lights here. I edit those. Brightness at 46, I'm at a dark green. Let's try a pink. I'm gonna bring the brightness up. Ooh. And you see, can you see what it's doing in the background when I do that?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's kind of giving you sort of a little bit of a preview. Whoa. A little bright. A little bright. Bring that down. It's a little hard to tell because like when it's showing you that sort of pre-render, it's like much dimmer than when it actually finishes the render. Kind of cool. I can also kind of affect by using my ambient light. I could turn my ambient light on and choose a color to it. And that'll sort of create the effect of putting a color wash on the whole stage without adding light sources to do that. So you guys see it's pretty easy to sort of just play around with light sources like that, right? You know, put different light objects in, use the visualization palette as sort of your lighting console to go in and turn lights on and off, change the color. You can even turn on lit fog if you want to. We can try that. I don't know how well that'll work out here. Lit fog. And I think for lit fog, you need a RenderWorks background. I believe you may need a background for lit fog. Let me see. Okay. Let's render this and see what happens here. I'm going to try final quality. But you get the idea. You can play around with your light sources very easily through that visualization palette, and you know, just make sure you name your light objects in a logical way so you can understand what they are in the visualization palette. So you can kind of see that there's a strong haze to that now as it's starting to render. And if you really get into it, you can tweak a lot of stuff about the visualization, but visualizing beams of light in the air and stuff like that. One note, every lighting symbol object is also a light source. So here I was showing you placing light objects because we're saying we're set designers, we're not designing the light plot. We're just trying to put some lights down and create sort of a lit rendition of our set, but we're not creating a light plot. If I was also creating a light plot, which I have a light plot in this file, any of the lighting symbols in my light plot in VectorWorks are also light objects. And you can just click on any of those symbols and go right click, edit light, and you'll get those same on, off, emitter settings and all that. So you could use your actual fixtures of your lighting plot to do the lighting render.
Would you have to have your light layer active in order for those to be selectable?
Yeah, I mean, you would need to, if you turned the layer off completely, then
I would think the lighting objects wouldn't,
Right.
even though they're on, you've turned the layer off.
Right.
So, and we can try it right now. Well, okay, just so you know, if you click down where it's rendering and you hit escape, it'll stop a render. Let me turn off the camera's layer here and do just a custom RenderWorks and see what happens. My ambient light is on right now though. So what did that do? Turn my ambient light off. So it actually, yeah, I'm not sure where the light is coming from right now, but I lost all that color information, so I definitely turn those lights off. So, makes sense? Questions about that? If you were creating an actual light plot, it's just kind of nice that you can use the actual symbols themselves. The last thing I was going to talk about, which you guys, is everybody heading out right now at 4:30? Does anybody want to hear about how to create elevations from this model? We can kind of stop now, or I can show you one more thing.
Go.
Okay.
Yeah, let's create an elevation.
Okay, so we've created this crazy 3D model of our set, right? And there's a lot of objects in here that are placed at angles to my standard views, right? Front, right. So if I want to like now create an elevation of that whole perimeter fence for, building and paint elevation purposes, how can I do that when it's laid out like this? If I create a viewport and look straight at it the way it is now, it's not going to be all flat the way a paint elevation would be, right? So here's how we're going to do this. One way of doing this, I'm going to turn off all the things that I don't want to create a view of, and I want to only see Okay. So I've got just my fence and the base of the fence turned on right now. Look at this isometric. Let's say I want to create an elevation of this part of the fence, this section of the fence. One way I can do that is to, again, go back to my custom working plane. And I'm going to select by a face. I'm going to choose the face of that section of the wall because that's what I want to look straight at, right? And I'm going to say, look at the working plane. And now I'm looking dead on that section of the fence, right? Now what I can do is I can go to View, Create Viewport, and when I go to create, it's not letting me see the, it's not letting me see the bottom of my window for some reason. Maybe hitting enter will work. So when I go to create a viewport, it's going to take whatever layer and classes are currently active. And right now it's only the fence, which is the only thing I want to see. And I can set the scale on here. And I've got to choose which drawing sheet I want to place this viewport on. I'm just going to pick one. Okay, hitting enter worked. That's good. And this is a drawing sheet I already had set up, so it has other views already on it, but this is the viewport that I just created. Right? And it took the view that I was currently in when I created the viewport, which is flat on that section of the fence. So what I could do now is right click, I could edit the crop on this viewport, and I could cut out I could get rid of the other part of the fence. And now I have an elevation view of just that part of the fence. Why is my crop so big? Bring that crop down a little bit. And now I can play with, whatever scale I want to put this at. Maybe I want to do a 1/2 inch print of this. I can also play with the render of this. I can actually do a foreground and a rear ground render. So I do like a rear ground render. Let's try fast RenderWorks. It's telling me the viewport is out of date, so I can hit update.
I could add a foreground render of hidden line, and that will kind of accentuate the lost my background. Oh, background's hidden line. Let's do OpenGL. And by playing with my render mode, I can get an elevation view now of that object that was placed at this weird angle on the drawing without, changing anything about it. But if I go back in the model and I change something about this fence, the spacing on the wires, whatever, it'll just update right in this viewport. And I don't have to, it's referencing the model. This window is referencing the model. Now here's a little thing going back to what I was talking about organizing your drawing. I did not place that broken down piece of the fence that's on the ground on a separate class. So I can't turn it off, right? So it would have been a good idea, and I could go back and do this obviously, to place that element on its own class so that I could shut it off, because it is part of the fence, but it's a part that I don't want to see when I'm trying to do this, right? So by keeping it organized in that way, you can shut off the objects you don't want to see. Now another way that I go about, so the one disadvantage that I could potentially see with doing it this way is if you look here in the viewport, it says custom view. If you were to change that to something else, so like a different view, one of the standard views, and then you kind of lose this custom view, and you'd have to like reset it.
At this screen, if you changed it.
Like in this viewport, yes. Right. If I change the view on this viewport to like, let's say right isometric, we'll do that. Update, which is going to put this viewport into a different view. I'm looking at the model now in a different way. I'm cropped, so I'd have to readjust my crop. But now if I go back to custom, it should just reset to a default. Like I would have to set the view, and like I kind of lose the ability to do that. It's like if I create
Can you undo?
I could undo, but what if I changed it?
A long time ago.
Yeah, then that doesn't really help me, so that's not great. So sometimes what I'll do when I'm ready to create elevations, because my model, your model is typically done when you're at that point for the most part, is in my model space. So say I have this, whatever it is, in model space, within the confines of my venue, what I'll do is I'll copy that whole object and I'll put it out here, but I'll place it initially, just make a copy. And then what I'll do is I'll grab this part and I'll rotate it flat. I'll grab this whole part, I'll rotate it like that, and I'll rotate that flat. So I'll create a flat version of it outside my space. That's still on the same class, but it's outside the venue. And now I can create a viewport that is front, a standard view. I can always get back to it easily, right? Now, if I have to go back and make changes, significant changes to my model, I'm going to want to do it to this instance of the object, not the one that's in here. So it kind of, it can create sort of an issue if you want to go back and make big changes that you want to reflect in model and in your elevations, but it kind of depends on your workflow, like where you're at and how likely it is, that you want to do that. You could always, I guess you could always make all your changes over here and then just copy this again and put it in the same place. Because the nice thing is, I'm looking at front. So say I want to make a bunch of changes. I make them out here in the model, in the 3D, within the venue, on stage. I make all my changes. Then I take it, again, paste it over here, flatten it out, and I make sure that it's aligned directly with this one up here. And then I delete this one, and then if I'm in a front view, it's still going to show up in my viewports the same way, right? If you have a lot of different objects you're creating elevations of, what I'll do is I'll stack them diagonally. That way, if I want to do a right side view of something, and there's another object here, I can get a front and a right side view. I can get a front and a right side view without them interfering with each other. You know, if they're on the same class or the same layer, right? And sometimes I'll do that as well. I'll just create a new layer for elevations, and all these objects will be on the elevations layer. That way I don't have to look at all these extra objects when I'm in 3D. So does that kind of make sense? Like how you could get to elevation drawings of parts of your model once you have it all created. Any questions?
But the organizational layer names, layer and class, that's very important.
Yeah, it
Because
really
it allows
is.
you to,
Especially when you're doing this kind of intensive work in 3D, like being able to turn objects off, you know, is really critical. So I use my layers as the overarching main category of organization. So like you see, there's one for the theater itself, Goodrich. There's one for the circuit layout. There's one for my masking. There's one for instruments. There's one for the electrics themselves. You know, that's my primary area of organization. And then I tend to have a class prefix for each layer. So like Jurassic dash, and then all the objects that are involved with my set, whatever the show is. I'd have an Avenue Q dash, I'd have an Avenue Q layer, and then I'd have an Avenue Q dash, and then a bunch of different classes for my objects that are the set part of Avenue Q, separate from the classes that have to do with soft goods and other things.
Now, is this something that you have to set up as you're drawing, or can you do your whole thing and then select it and put it in classes?
You can do that.
Okay.
Using that select tool as a, will help you do that. I mean, it's kind of, a question of how you want to work.
Right. Because I can't see myself as I'm drawing.
It is. You do have to be thinking about it a little as you're going.
Yeah.
Like, oh, what class should I, I should create a new class for this new object that I'm building,
I mean, I find myself doing that all the time. I'll have the electrics layer active with the set visible, and I'm making set changes because they're all show, snap, modify.
Right.
But that set element ended up in the light plot.
You want at least a little care on what is active when you start drawing something.
And that was something I learned as I was continuing. I do it less now.
What I'll tend to do, like when I started modeling all this Jurassic Park stuff, was I sort of created one class initially, Jurassic dash main or whatever it was, and I just kind of started putting all my objects on that. And then as I progressed, it's like, okay, here's the fence, here's the base of the fence. Then I would just copy that class and reassign, this is now fence base, this is now fence. And so I start with a class that's just sort of for everything to do with Jurassic Park or everything to do with Avenue Q, whatever, and then I just make copies of it and rename them as I go.
I see, okay.
So I start with just one. I don't try to predict, I'm gonna need a class for the guard tower, I'm gonna need a class for the fence, I'm gonna need a class for, I don't try to predict all that necessarily.
Right.
You can, if you have some idea of what you're gonna create, but it's easier to just kind of start with one and then just make copies as you go.
but you also have a basic structure you tend to follow. That you create your show and then you dash.
Well, yeah. I mean, it always obviously it helps to also start from a file for the venue you're using, right? This 3D file here for Goodrich is very detailed, but you really don't need one that is super detailed. What you really need is your proscenium opening, your stage floor, maybe at least some key seat locations that you're going to want to look from, kind of thing. Like at a minimum, if you're going to be building in 3D, obviously you want at least that, at least like a building shell with a proscenium opening and a stage floor, so you can put your curtains in and whatever. Having all the extra, like the detail of the whole house and the whole auditorium section, like that's nice for you want to do fancy renderings and stuff, but it's not critical for just doing the design.
Right.
So other questions?
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
This
We
was
got
great.
through everything. That image prop tool is really awesome. Like, I had no idea that even was a thing. And then it's like, this is awesome.
I love the Tinkerbell one.
I mean,
I'm
you
glad
could-
that you can
like-
set the parameters. I didn't know you could
Like,
do that.
you can take a picture of all those Avenue Q flats laid out.
Mm-hmm.
You can take it in Photoshop, tweak it, adjust the contrast, whatever, and then image prop into VectorWorks. Bam, you've got
A 3D model.
a
of that.
3D version of the whole Avenue Q facade from a picture of the set in, as long as it took you to do the Photoshopping. It will take longer than,
Yeah.
actually importing into VectorWorks. But check out there's a video, VectorWorks has, I think, a YouTube channel for educational stuff also, how to. There's a whole tool called the video screen tool that has so many options for video screens and showing the projector and putting drapery around it and different projection screen types and front rear projection. It's such crazy what this one tool does if you're doing video stuff.
Okay.
Like, it was pretty cool.
I'll take a look at it.
There's so many tools like that, ones that I'm not even aware of. Like, oh, there's a whole super special tool just for video screens. There's also one for LED screens, separate from video.
Oh, man.
This projection screen. So, cool. If nobody else has any questions, then we're.
Thanks, man.
My email is on the handout. If you have any questions at any point, shoot me an email. Alrighty. Have a safe drive home, everybody.
Yes.